A fair question on this Monday morning. Who is running the show in NATO? Is it the President of the United States? Is it the 800-pound gorilla that's Donald Trump at the moment? Or is it the somewhat less heavy and less powerful president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky? Or is it Europe in general? Is it some of the European leaders altogether? That's a fair question. It didn't used to be a question. It used to be automatic. Definitely the United States is the leader of NATO, period. Point blank, no questions about it. Now, that's not quite so clear. Heading into this weekend, there's been a lot of diplomatic flurry over the weekend and even into today in Berlin, primarily, where President Trump has sent Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner into Europe to try and to come to some sort of an agreement on what the Western side together is going to say about where we're going to go into these negotiations to try to get the Russia-Ukraine war over. President Trump's position has been publicly that he wants Ukraine to give up some land, that he said just a few days ago that he believes that the Russia-Ukraine war can't be won by Ukraine, and therefore they're going to have to give up some territory. This, in fact, you can see in this, Gary, if you can put that first full screen up there, this is what Trump has been saying, what apparently Steve Witkoff has been sent to Ukraine to try to Europe, rather, to try to get Ukraine to agree to, along with the Western allies. Trump wanted Ukraine to cede land, the headline from the New York Times says. Ukraine has another offer. Ukraine's leaders have responded with a counterproposal that demands legal guarantees of protection against future Russian aggression, and that Ukraine would hold on to land it currently holds, i.e. the opposite of what Trump said, according to descriptions of the plan by European leaders and diplomats. The 20-point Ukrainian plan for ending nearly 4 years of fighting, unlikely to be accepted by Russia, the New York Times laconically poses, is part of a Ukraine attempt to stymie Mr. Trump's demands. That tells you all you need to know right there. If Trump was in charge, he wouldn't have sent his delegate there to try and convince Ukraine of anything. He wouldn't have tried to cajole Zelensky into agreeing to these things, but instead, it's as though Witkoff is there to beg and plead Zelensky, like he's the guy running the show. Remember, this started off as a 28-point peace plan. Witkoff and Kushner have already been to Moscow to try to put their position on the ground here to try to figure out where there can be some sort of area for agreement. You may remember that the initial comment out of Russia at that time was, well, I mean, this isn't exactly something we're going to agree to, but at least it recognizes that we have a position. So in that regard, it's something useful. Putin himself subsequently said, listen, this is a good basis to begin negotiations. So the Russians already didn't agree with the 28-point peace plan. I showed you in the initial aftermath that at least 6 major points that were all deal breakers, every one of them independently. If they had been the only one, that by itself is a deal breaker, but the 6 of them together was not even seriously considered in Moscow. Now then, those 28 points have been turned into 20 points. And by the way, the 8 that are missing are almost certainly not those 6 points. To the contrary, probably all of those 6 points that were in the original plan that Russia wouldn't agree to have been added to. So many of the things that Ukraine didn't like in that 28-point peace plan have been removed. And now here's the subsequent. We still haven't seen it, but we've seen analogies to it and references to what it is that it's more convenient and more appreciable to Ukraine. So Ukraine, ironically, is now saying some of the same things that Russia did initially. Well, this 28-point peace plan is something we can start with, but let's get rid of all this stuff we don't like, and let's go with these 20 that we do like. You can almost just say categorically, if Ukraine and Europe are agreeing to something, then you can be guaranteed that the Russians won't go with it. And that's pretty much where we are right now. And so if you're wondering if Witkoff's going to Europe, to Berlin, meeting with Ukraine and with Europe, if you think that might be getting the two sides moving back closer in the direction of Trump, obviously that's going to be disappointed. So I just showed you the New York Times headline. Well, here's what Zelensky said, I want to say just a couple of hours ago on his X. He says, I met with President of Germany's Bundestag We discussed mechanisms that would make it possible to use frozen Russian assets for the benefit of Ukraine. We appreciated Germany's leadership on this position. We also spoke separately about our joint efforts with partners to end the war, establish a dignified peace, and guarantee security. And that is one of the key points here. Ukraine is looking for security guarantees. And I'm not talking about just some kind of like a Budapest Memorandum piece of paper that they're talking about in the past. They're looking for Article 5 type negotiations and guarantees like the kind that NATO has right now. Let's take a look at speaking of that, because Kyiv mentioned some of that earlier today.
Why countries want to be in NATO. If this is out of the question, then we need to see what are the security guarantees that are tangible. They can't be, papers or promises. They have to be real troops, real capabilities, so that Ukraine is able to defend itself. We have to understand that Donbas is not Putin's endgame. If it gets Donbas, then the fortress is down, and then they definitely move on with taking the whole of Ukraine. If Ukraine goes, then other regions are also in danger. We know this from the history, and we should learn from history.
Yeah, the one thing I agree with her on is that last phrase: we should learn from history. And for Kyiv to think that she's going to take something from 1944, 1945, 1939 at the beginning of World War II, and then say that applies here and there's going to be definite here. You've got to be able to learn that wars are won and lost based on the balance of power. And as we saw plainly in World War II, as we have seen through millennia of conflicts before this, is that wars of attrition are won by the side that have the most manpower, the political will, and they also have the industrial capacity to be able to sustain wars over long periods of time. It doesn't matter who's right. It doesn't matter who's wrong. It doesn't matter whether your morality lies, not even a factor. That's something that people can toss onto to try to get the political will of their side, etc. But in terms of actual combat, winning and losing, they do not care about your morality. They didn't care about Hitler's morality when he attacked France in 1940. They didn't care about Germany's morality when the Soviet Union and the United States and the Allies swept in from two sides to destroy Germany in 1945. No one cares about your morality. The war doesn't care about your morality, more specifically. Now, if you're talking about who can win and lose a war, you have to be able to at least privately set aside all the moralizing. Because obviously every side is going to moralize its side. Russia's doing it now. Ukraine's doing it now. Europe is doing it now. The United States, not as much, at least not now. Certainly Biden did. Definitely moralized everything. None of that ever had any implication and any impact on the conduct of the war, who was going to win and who was going to lose. It had zero to do with the 2023 offensive by the Ukraine side. Nothing. So they had what they considered to be all the moral high ground, etc. They broke their teeth on the front because the war doesn't care about your moralizing. It doesn't care then. It didn't care in 1945, and it doesn't care today. So what does matter is what is the balance of power? Who has the fundamentals it takes to actually win a war? And that is the problem here. It doesn't exist on the Ukraine side. It doesn't exist on the Western side. They want it to, but it demonstrably does not, because you can, for the most part, count these things. You can count how many men each side has. You can count how many potential other soldiers that they've got to be able to sustain something over time, not just the nearly 4 years we've had so far, but on into the future. You can count how much ammunition and weapons each side can produce, how much they are producing, how much they have produced, and what are their capacity to continue to go on. And almost on those two factors alone, you can see that there is no chance that Russia can lose. And you also have to add on top of that Russia has nuclear weapons. So when you add that on top of it, and you can go back to the political will calculation, let's just say that both sides have an equal amount. You can even argue that the Ukraine side has a greater political will. That's arguable because, I mean, their country has literally been just ravaged by war, and they would have a lot of desire to end that war and to get the invaders pushed out. naturally. But whether you accept it or not from the West doesn't matter. But the reality is that the Russian will, if it's not exactly equal, it's really close. Because from their perspective, and that's what matters, from their perspective, this is an existential fight that they cannot and will not lose. They so far have not suffered much as a nation. They have not even gone to full mobilization in their troops. They have not gone to full mobilization in their defense capacity. They've substantially accelerated it, but they haven't gone full on. They have a lot more to go. The 19 rounds of sanctions plus the ones the U.S. has put on there have been biting and have hurt Russia in many ways, but they figure ways to go around it. It has not yet caused real hardship in Russia. And it would have to get so much worse, and Russia would still endure that because they view it as an existential fight. You have to calculate all of that in when you're trying to say, what policies should we endure to make this, to bring this to an end? And can we just continue on with the preferred outcome we have? Will the fundamentals support that? Or can we learn from history and say, yeah, that's probably not going to work? Well, you probably already know where this is going because you've watched our channel. So you know that this is something we've been doing for years of ignoring those fundamentals. And now then we're just into the next round here where we're getting closer and closer to bringing an end game to this on a bad side for Ukraine and Europe, because we are adamantly, passionately ignoring those balance of power realities on the ground. That's where we are here. And one of the things that Zelensky has done here in his current phase is to say, all right, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw you a bone, Donald. That's what he's saying to Trump. So he's saying, all right, you know what? I'll publicly say we'll forego NATO. So that's never been a question. The Russians have said that from the beginning. Trump has acknowledged they'll never get into NATO. I have told you that the NATO forces ensured and knew, even back during the Biden administration, before this war started in 2022, we knew that Ukraine would never come into NATO. It would be foolish to do because of the Article 5 guarantees that would go. Nobody in the West wants to hand Article 5 guarantees to somebody who's unstable and corrupt as Ukraine on the border with Russia. That would be a permanent potential for war. So they said it. They claimed no one's going to tell us who's going to put it in there, but they knew the fact back then. Well, they know the fact right now. So you're not giving anything away by saying that there's not going to be any NATO. Duh. No kidding. But here's the problem for getting this thing resolved is Zelensky still is looking for Article 5 type guarantees. And as I think Kaya Kallis there, I don't remember if it was in that clip we just had or elsewhere in that speech, she just says, look, this can't just be paper. It's got to be hardcore terms. There's got to be troops involved, etc. That is fantasy. That is just wishful thinking to the highest order. Nobody in Europe, forget about Ukraine, nobody in Europe is going to put their national security on the line, is going to risk their troops to fight for Ukraine at some crazy future date after this is over, when they won't do it now. It stands to reason. It's as logical as it can get. No one's doing it now because the same reason they won't do it then. They don't want to have their own country on the receiving end of Russian missiles or the potential for nuclear escalation that they can't match. No one's going to seek that out on behalf of a corrupt regime like Ukraine, that we know for a fact that Zelensky's right and left-hand men have now been, and this is not the first one, their defense minister a couple of years back was also had to be fired because of corruption. All kinds of corruption things have been going on for years. It's just now bubbling to the surface. He's at the center of all this. People know it, even though they don't like to say anything publicly because they put this good face on. Would make the European leaders look bad if they acknowledge publicly what everybody knows privately, that Zelensky and his entire regime are incredibly corrupt. No one is going to die for that. When it comes down to the brass tacks, they're not going to die for it. And yet, knowing that, they still don't do the rational, logical thing of get this war over with and get the risks to our countries in the West over with. Instead, they keep playing around the edges of it. And let's see, this in terms of what the Russian side will do, this is important too. Russians are watching this. Remember, Witkoff spent 5 hours in Russia first. And according to Witkoff's X account over the weekend, They spent 5 hours with the Europeans on Sunday, and apparently they're still there right now. So Witkoff is getting both sides of this. Well, given that I told you there a second ago about that, now the Ukraine has changed the 28 points to 20 points that are much more favorable to Ukraine today. The Russian figure Yuri Yushikov was asked. He's one of the senior advisors to Putin. He was asked on camera, "What do you think about all this?"
But I think that the contribution of both Ukrainians and Europeans to these documents is unlikely to be constructive. That's the problem.
You said you haven't seen these documents yet.
Not yet.
We haven't seen them yet, but if there are any relevant amendments, we will have very strong objections because we have made our position very clear, and it seemed the Americans understood it quite well.
Strong objections to which points?
To many points. There will be some provisions that are absolutely unacceptable to us, including those concerning territorial issues. That's what I think.
Is this about what's being discussed now? The possible demilitarized zone in the Donetsk Republic? Not only that,
but the issue of territories in general. It was actively discussed here in Moscow, and the Americans not only know but also understand our position. But what they will end up with on paper after these consultations, I don't know.
And that's interesting, and we're going to show in a segment later on today. Part of the reason why the Russian side is so frustrated is because they said we've been down this path before. In 2019, there was a big famous, you may have seen part of it, a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, Angela Merkel of Germany, Emmanuel Macron, and Vladimir Putin. And they were talking about the implementation of the Minsk Accords and what they were trying to accomplish. And Russia said at the time they were worried about protections for the people inside of the Donbass area in particular. And they, things that were in the Minsk agreements, like there had to be a change in the Ukrainian constitution where it would provide protections for the Russian people. That's what Russia has been saying since 2015. And that's what they said in 2021. And that's what they said in 2022. And that's what they're saying today. Their position literally has not changed. And yet you see, instead of acknowledging reality, you see the Kyiv said, well, obviously their objective is not just the Donbass. It's actually be all of Ukraine, and then it'll be all of us, which is nonsense. It's just absurd just to think that. Russia has never said anything besides that the protection of the people in the Donbass and the Russian ethnic people inside of Ukraine has always been their priority of effort, and they don't want anything more. But that doesn't play well. Europe can't acknowledge that, because then that undermines their position. Well, if you think that Russia just wants this, then let's just be done with this and move on. But if you think, no, they'll be coming for us if we do that, then that gives people a chance in the West to say, oh, well, then we can't agree to that because he'll be coming after us next. There's no truth to it. It's a lie perpetuated by the West. When you hear Kaya Kallas say this, when you hear Mark Rutte say this, and they all say this, they're lying, not exaggeration, not that they're fooled. They're fooled on some things, and I think that they have deluded themselves on some categories, not this one. This is one that is a known lie. They know for sure that's not Russia's objective, but they have to keep their people scared on our side in order to keep supporting something that is self-evidently foolish at face value. Now, especially worrisome, I showed Kaya Kallas there. We talked about Mark Rutte last week, but interestingly enough, it's the British that may be part of the biggest problem here. And the MI6, this is kind of comical. The head of MI6, this is just out today, Ukraine-Russia war latest, MI6 chief to issue Putin warnings after Zelensky offers to drop NATO ambitions. The new head of the MI6 is expected to warn Vladimir Putin today that Britain will never abandon Ukraine as she hits out at Russia's aggressive, expansionist, and revisionist threat. Blaise Matewili, forgive me if I'm butchering that name, will use her first speech as MI6 headquarters to say Putin should be in no doubt. Our support is enduring. The pressure we apply on Ukraine's behalf will be sustained. Now, that is going to be surely a scary thing for Vladimir Putin. Oh, wait. Actually, Vladimir Putin is not fool. He does actually do, as we suggest the West does, he looks at the balance of power. He looks at the capacity of each side. And here's what he sees with the Ukraine side. This is actually an analysis of the British military. This is from last year. It has not changed. I checked before we came on here. This is from the British Insider Back then. The British Army has shrunk to its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars. The British Army has shrunk to its lowest level since the early 1800s. Years of relentless budget cuts have left it with just 73,000 active duty soldiers, which is the same they have right now. That's a far cry from the Chinese army of 2 million soldiers, or Russia's, this was 1.3 at the time, it's now 1.5 million, or the 460,000 active duty troops of the U.S. Army. Britain's army is now smaller than those of Romania and Bangladesh. Now, how scared do you think Vladimir Putin, if the Bangladesh military wags a finger in his face and said, I'm warning you, he's going to go, what? It's like a lion being afraid of a little mouse squeaking and saying, you better do this, etc. No matter what else comes out of his mouth after that, Putin's just going to go, you're wasting my time here. I don't even consider that. And Gary showed you that BBC headline from last week where they said if something happened and there was an all-out war, a conventional war between Ukraine and, or rather the Europeans, NATO, or otherwise, that Britain was a part of in Russia, they could sustain combat operations for a few weeks. So they're the size of Romania or Bangladesh, and they have the capacity to fight for a few weeks, and then that's it. They cannot sustain combat. They can't do what Russia is doing. And that tells you all you need to know about what is possible and why the Russians simply don't listen to anything coming out of the West. Why there was some ex post over the weekend by some European figures that just irked me to no end, and I actually replied to some of them. But they're saying, how dare the Russians fire, these air attacks that they have against the Ukraine side while they're talking about peace. They claim to want to go to peace, but they keep doing these things because that's what the Russians have said they would do. They have never said anything else. In fact, they emphatically, repeatedly, in public, in private, keep telling the Western side, we will not do a ceasefire. We will do a negotiation. We will come to a final agreement. And once that final agreement is reached, then the guns will go silent permanently. But we will not do a negotiation with an unconditional ceasefire. Ergo, we will keep fighting. Putin keeps saying, we will accomplish our objectives diplomatically or militarily, period. We'll do one or the other. So if Russia's saying that and they're doing that, why do you act like something's different? Why do you act like what a shock it is? That's almost like you actually never listen to anything that the Russians say, and then you're surprised when they do what they say. Now, I know for the West, that's probably a really surprising thing because we rarely do what we say, and we rarely mean what we say. So I guess it's a natural thing to ascribe those same categories to the Russian side. But in this case, they're deadly serious, and they're deadly consistent on what they're saying and doing. And just to kind of reinforce this, the British side especially has this hatred of Russia that blinds them to any kind of rational ability to see the realities. I mentioned that about Kaya Kallas a minute ago, that she can't take the emotion out of the calculation in her mind, and so she can't do the rational balance of power analysis that is self-evident. Well, apparently neither can the British. This is from Sir General Michael Sharif, a retired British Army who's very influential in British, mentality and the public persona, etc., that pushes like the Keir Starmer view on things. Here's what he said last month.
He blows hot about Tomahawks. He blows hot about sanctions.
More willing to walk away from Ukraine than he is to punish Russia?
I think we've just got to get used to the fact that at every stage, Trump has been playing Russia's game. He blows hot about Tomahawks. He blows hot about sanctions, about secondary sanctions. And that bamboozles the Europeans into thinking that he's going to lean in and support Ukraine. But he's not going to do that. And we've got to get used to that. And therefore, Europe has just got to now seriously get its act together, recognize that America under Trump is simply not an unreliable ally. It is our enemy's friend. And where does that place America? And that Europe has got to do it alone.
So he says, you know what? Because Trump acknowledges the reality and the balance of power, he's the friend of Russia. So we have to be ready to go it alone. So that's really strong language, diplomatically, especially. I know that the guy's retired. He's not active duty, but he's a very well-known figure in there. For him to say that, and of course, Times Radio has always been against Russia and it literally hated them, so they love that kind of comment. But it does to get out there, and the British people hear that. Well, listen, you can't say those kind of things unless you're ready to back them up. So you want to say that America is Russia's friend because they acknowledge reality? That's crazy. What's even more crazy, though, is if President Trump, and man, do I wish he would do this. I did a whole show last week called the 800-pound gorilla that Trump should be. Man, does he need to do it. In light of comments like this, in light of what the British are doing, in light of what the Europeans are doing, we could add Merz to that, the Chancellor of Germany. They keep saying over and over, they're trying to sabotage what Trump is doing. Of course, Zelensky is. I told you at the top of the show. Okay, you guys want to call us the bad guy? You want to say because we're trying to reach a negotiated settlement that would keep Ukrainian people alive and at least preserve some level of political independence for whatever's left? You don't like that? Then you take care of it, my friend. If you say we need to be ready to go it alone, you should do it. President Trump should say, have at it. If this is your attitude, and I think he should put the leaders of France, British, Germany on the line, NATO, Rutte, European Union leader, Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, put them all online publicly. Do you agree with what General Michael Sharif said there, or are you going to follow with what I'm leading? Here's where I'm leading. This is where I'm going. This is what I'll support. I'm not going to support any kind of hard security guarantees. Hell no. There's not going to be any NATO. There's also not going to be any guarantees. Definitely not. That's what Trump should say. You either get on board with this and let's get this over with on the terms I'll support, or you can go it alone, as the retired general said. You want to go down that path? Go down that path. So General Sharif is not anybody on active duty, so he can just give an opinion. These other folks are in position. So Trump needs to put them on record and saying, where do you stand on this? Here again, and instead of having all these private conversations with Witkoff, with both Putin and with the European leaders, he needs to say, all right, here's what I'm telling them. This is the public. This is what we're willing to support, and I've told both sides of this. And if both sides are not willing to bring this together and to make it happen, then, and especially if I'm willing to accommodate what the Russians want because it's reality. Let me address one other thing, because I also saw this over the weekend. There's this claim that the European side can't do this because it gives, it justifies and supports aggression, and it rewards it. No. That's a similar situation to the dynamic I've told you earlier about here, where war doesn't give a damn about your morality, anyone's morality. Russian, Ukraine, Europeans, don't make any difference. War doesn't care about that. It only cares about a bomb when it lands on the ground will blow up. A bullet will destroy somebody if it hits them, and a drone will kill someone if it lands on them, period. Doesn't care where it came from. It doesn't care where it's going. It just cares what happens on the ground. Likewise, this whole thing about saying, you know what, it rewards aggression. No. Bringing this war to a conclusion acknowledges the balance of freaking power. It recognizes realities, and that if you keep holding to this allegedly morality that you have on the West, that we can't reward aggression, then what you are doing is you are rewarding Russia by giving them every reason to keep going militarily. You cannot stop them on your side. You can't, unless you bring the British Army for a few weeks, apparently, and then expand the war, because now then you're going to be receiving these bombs, and then things get worse, and we have the potential for nuclear escalation, which I've talked about. Well, I don't think Britain's going to want to do that. So if they're not going to do that, then they see that the Ukraine army by itself cannot win, no matter how much money it gets, despite what Bill Browder said last week. It's not going to happen. Evidence, you have it. You've got almost 4 years to prove that he's wrong and all these people are wrong. And so by clinging to this claim that we cannot reward aggression, then you are putting the price on the Ukrainian men. They will keep dying for a war that cannot be won because you want to moralize. That's why I say that the European leaders here, history will condemn in the worst possible way as being feckless and foolish and just stupid and immoral, because they want to keep this preference that they would like to have. And so instead of bringing this to an end, and we can certainly go all the way back to 2022, where Boris Johnson and apparently the U.S. President Biden rejected peace and convinced Zelensky not to reach an agreement. If they had done the opposite and said, dude, you can't win this, man. Get the best deal you can, and let's just get this off the table. Think of how many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men who would be alive today. This war would have been over years ago. They would have already been rebuilding most of this stuff. A whole bunch of other whole swaths of the country would never have been destroyed. That's crazy. Yet that is exactly where we are here. And that's what this moralizing can do. I cannot in more strong say physical evidence shows the fecklessness of the entire Western world and how what they're trying to get accomplished here. And it proves the reality of what I'm saying about what the balance of power is. It has been this from the beginning. It has played out that way so far, and it will play out that way into the future. The question is going to be, is Trump finally going to do what on paper he is, the leader of NATO, and stand up and do some hard leadership? Or is he going to say, yeah, I got the right ideas, he has the right mentality, but he doesn't have the leadership or I'm just going to say it, he don't have the balls to do the hard thing. He needs to have the balls to stand up and tell the Europeans, you either get in line or figure it out on your own. I will not underwrite known failure one more day. That's what he needs to do. We'll see what's going to happen. But if we don't get that, folks, if we just get the more meandering and the more lack of courage in the White House, we're just going to have more advances on the Russian side. It's just as sure as can be. More Ukrainian men will die every single day unnecessarily. That's where we are. We'll see what happens with that. We're going to look at more detailed at the European side of this with Professor Glenn Deason later this afternoon. We're also going to talk to, as everything works out, the Russian side of this with Stanislav Koprivnik later on. Just be watching. We haven't figured out what time we're going to have that aired yet, but so we're going to cover all aspects of this in more detail as we go through the rest of the day. Thanks very much, folks. Look forward to seeing you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.